Disney World's luxury resorts sell one promise, and it's a simple one. Pay $700, $1,000, sometimes upward of $1,700 a night, and you get a flawless, fully immersive experience that no ordinary hotel anywhere else can touch, no matter how nice the chain hotel down the road might otherwise be, for a fraction of the price. That's the entire pitch behind the deluxe tier. Not just a nicer room, not just a better view, but a guarantee that the execution matches the price tag every single time you walk through the lobby, no matter which night of the year you're checking in or which specific resort you picked out of the 24 options on property. Right now, at 6 of these resorts, that guarantee is under real strain. Some of what's coming is the kind of thing you'd almost expect at this point, given everything else going on across the resort right now. A construction wall standing where a view used to be, a pool closed months longer than anyone actually told you it would be when you first booked the room and paid your deposit. But by the time we get to the final resort on this list, we're not talking about an inconvenience anymore. We're talking about guests being evacuated from their hotel twice inside the same 2 weeks, with fire trucks and ambulances involved both times. Here are 6 Disney World luxury resorts falling apart right now, counting up to the one that turned into an actual emergency. Number 6, Disney's Boardwalk Inn. This is a walkable, genuinely atmospheric deluxe resort styled after an early 1900s Atlantic boardwalk, prized specifically for putting guests within easy walking distance of both Epcot and Hollywood Studios, with a lively promenade running right along the water, packed with street performers, arcade games, and lakeside dining on a good night when everything's actually open. Refurbishment work here is confirmed through late 2026, but Disney hasn't specified exactly which areas are affected at any given point in that stretch, leaving guests to essentially find out when they physically arrive and see for themselves what's behind construction walls that particular week of their trip. On top of that vague timeline, the Luna Park pool is now confirmed closed from January through April of 2027, pushing the resort's total construction footprint even further out than most guests originally understood when they booked their trip months earlier based on an older bulletin. The vagueness itself has become its own separate complaint, layered right on top of whatever the actual construction ends up disrupting during any given stay, since guests genuinely can't plan around information Disney simply hasn't provided yet at the time they book. Guests paying deluxe rates for one specific walkable atmosphere along the water are especially exposed when Disney won't even tell them which part of that atmosphere might be sitting behind a tarp the exact week they're visiting, months after they've already paid in full for the room and built their whole itinerary around evenings spent out on that promenade. Number 5, Disney's Polynesian Village Resort. This is lush tropical theming, direct monorail access to Magic Kingdom, and over 50 years of standing as one of Disney World's most beloved luxury resorts, the kind of place with enough accumulated goodwill that guests kept booking it almost on reflex, trip after trip, without much second-guessing the decision beforehand. Ongoing construction of a new Disney Vacation Club tower has kept the resort in an active construction state for years now, and exterior maintenance on the Great Ceremonial House has specifically affected the views from Ohana, one of the resort's most expensive and hardest to book dining experiences, built almost entirely around that lagoon view as the actual core of its appeal to guests booking months in advance. A widely shared Reddit thread from a guest who had just paid over $900 a night for a stay here went semi-viral, specifically for pushing back on whether that price still made sense once the construction was factored into the actual experience they received during their trip. When guests are publicly doing the math on whether a $900 nightly rate is still defensible at your own resort, in a thread that gets shared and argued about across an entire online community of people planning their own future trips, that's not a fringe complaint anymore, easily dismissed as one unusually unhappy guest. That's the luxury pricing model starting to crack out in the open, where every other guest considering a future booking can watch the whole argument play out for themselves before they ever pick up the phone. Number 4, Disney's Grand Floridian Resort and Spa. This is Disney World's flagship luxury resort, full stop, Victorian theming, direct monorail access, and the highest rack rates anywhere on property, routinely exceeding $1,000 a night for guests who specifically want the one resort Disney itself treats as the crown jewel of the entire portfolio, the property every other deluxe resort is implicitly measured against. A multi-year refurbishment that began before the 2020 park closures has been extended repeatedly since then, most recently pushed to early 2027, specifically for the porte cochere. The covered entrance guests actually drive through on their way to check in for the very first time and form their initial impression of the resort. The 2025 holiday season lost its lobby gingerbread house tradition entirely because of the ongoing construction, a display some guests had quietly built into their own family holiday traditions over years of repeat Christmas visits, planning entire trips around seeing it in person. On top of that, the Grand Floridian Cafe will close outright from mid-July through October of 2026 for its own separate refresh, with brunch service temporarily relocated over to Citricos in the meantime, for anyone still hoping to eat there during that stretch. Recent guest sentiment increasingly describes the resort as no longer feeling like a distinct Disney hotel at all. One reviewer called it flatly pretty boring, and one parent specifically said their own kids seemed to be treated like a nuisance in what's become a more formal, distinctly adult-leaning atmosphere that doesn't leave much room for young families the way Disney resorts typically do. The single most expensive resort at Disney World, losing its own signature holiday tradition, and an entire restaurant for months at a stretch is exactly the kind of gap between price and experience this list exists to call out in the first place. Number 3, Disney's Beach Club Resort and Yacht Club Resort. These two share walking distance to Epcot and, more importantly, Stormalong Bay, widely considered the single best pool anywhere on Disney World property, and genuinely the main reason a lot of guests justify this resort's premium over comparable options nearby that do not come with that specific pool attached to the room rate. A refurbishment originally slated to wrap by mid-2025 has now been extended 3 separate times, most recently pushed all the way to late 2027, over 2 full years past what guests were originally told when the project first began construction. Stormalong Bay itself closed for a full 6 months, from January through June of 2025, stripping the resort of the exact amenity guests are paying the premium for during a huge stretch of prime vacation planning season, right as families were booking their summer trips around it months in advance. One longtime resort tracker who's followed the property closely for years described the pace of construction here as nearly perpetual for roughly 5 years running now, and guests have openly described feeling ghosted by the repeated timeline extensions, which tend to get buried in small print during the booking process rather than surfaced clearly up front where anyone would actually see them before handing over a non-refundable deposit. Stormalong Bay is the entire reason a lot of people choose to pay beach club prices in the first place, ahead of nearly every other reason someone might list for choosing this specific resort. A pool that's been under some form of construction on and off for roughly 5 years straight, with its own finish line pushed back 3 separate times and counting, as of this reporting, genuinely undercuts the resort's whole reason for existing at this specific price point over its neighbors. Number 2, Disney's Contemporary Resort. This is monorail access running straight through the building's own atrium, walking distance to Magic Kingdom, and rates that routinely climb into the high hundreds and well past $1,000 a night for Bay Lake Tower villas specifically, on top of the already substantial standard tower rooms below them. Disney's own construction bulletin now reads September 2024 through late 2027 for phased work spanning the atrium, Bay Lake Tower, and the main tower altogether, which means guests booking anywhere through the back half of this decade are effectively booking into nearly 3 full years of ongoing construction at one single resort, with no shorter, cleaner option available if they still want that specific monorail loop location near Magic Kingdom. Exterior elevator landing repairs ran at Bay Lake Tower, from late March through late May of 2026, and the Skyway Bridge connecting Bay Lake Tower to the main tower was shut down on weekdays from March 30th through May 1st of that same year, forcing guests onto alternate routes during business hours for over a month straight, regardless of which building they actually happened to be staying in that week. One industry outlet built an entire piece specifically around this resort, being the hotel guests are actively choosing to avoid until the refurbishment finally clears in late 2027, treating the construction timeline itself as a legitimate reason to book somewhere else on property entirely rather than take the risk on a stay that could land in the middle of any given phase. Nearly 3 years of phased construction at one of the single most expensive resorts on the entire property means guests are paying premium, walking distance pricing for what amounts to a multi-year renovation project they never actually signed up for the moment they clicked. Confirm on their reservation months in advance, often before any of the extended timelines had even been announced. And number 1, Disney's Wilderness Lodge. This is immersive Pacific Northwest theming, soaring log architecture, an indoor geyser that erupts on a timer in the middle of the lobby, and a genuinely rustic luxury escape that guests pay a real premium for, specifically because nowhere else on property looks or feels remotely like it, inside or out, right down to the smell of the timber in the lobby. On June 18th, 2026, the main building's central chiller lines suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure, and the timing could not have been worse for a resort built almost entirely out of heavy timber that holds heat far longer than a standard hotel structure ever would once the cooling actually stops. Central Florida was locked under a severe heat advisory at the time, with real field temperatures climbing past 105 degrees outside the building's walls, and in some reports pushing past 110. Without any centralized air conditioning, guest rooms inside the resort reportedly reached the low to mid-80s and higher over a 4-day outage, with upper floors hit hardest as heat naturally rose through the building's soaring vaulted log ceilings and had nowhere left to go once it got there. Storybook dining at Artist Point and Whispering Canyon Cafe had every single reservation wiped from the booking system for 2 full days straight, with existing dinner reservations canceled outright rather than simply rescheduled, leaving hundreds of families scrambling to find an alternative table service meal in the middle of peak summer travel season at a time when nearly everything else on property was already fully booked and unable to absorb the overflow. Then, roughly 2 weeks after that entire ordeal had seemingly wrapped up and guests thought the worst was behind them, the resort was evacuated a second time on July 1st for an unrelated incident serious enough to bring multiple fire trucks and ambulances onto the property and require a multi-hour clearance protocol before any guest was allowed back inside the building at all. One guest present that day reported smelling something odd in the lobby, though no visible smoke was ever reported, and by around 5:25 that afternoon, guests were finally cleared to re-enter. Real-time reports across Reddit, X, and Facebook vacation planning groups all describe the same thing independently of each other without any coordination between them: the main lobby, the dining rooms, and the guest floors completely without cooling, inside a building that guests are paying a genuine luxury premium to stay inside specifically because of its atmosphere, not despite whatever might be happening behind the scenes structurally. A 4-day air conditioning failure severe enough to cancel dinner reservations outright, followed by a full building evacuation 2 weeks later, isn't a maintenance hiccup you write off as simple bad luck and quietly move past on your next trip. It's infrastructure old enough that the building itself is starting to fail, the exact guests paying a genuine premium to be inside it, in a resort that opened back in 1994 and has been running on largely the same core mechanical systems ever since. Of everything on this list, this is the one that stops being a mere inconvenience and starts being a genuine safety story. Guests are still talking about weeks later, long after the temporary chillers rolled in and the temperature finally came back down to something livable. None of these 6 resorts are falling apart for the same specific reason, and treating them as one identical story would flatten something that's actually more complicated once you look closely at each one individually rather than lumping them together under one blanket complaint about the whole company. Some are dealing with refurbishment timelines that keep extending years past their original end dates, like Contemporary and Beach Club, where the finish line keeps moving further away the longer guests wait for it to actually arrive on schedule, year after year of updated bulletins that keep pushing the same promise further into the future. Some have lost a specific defining tradition or amenity that guests built real emotional attachment to over years of repeat visits, like the Grand Floridian's Gingerbread House or Beach Club's Stormalong Bay, sitting closed during peak vacation season, right when families were counting on it most for that specific trip they'd already paid for. And one, Wilderness Lodge, has moved past simple inconvenience entirely into something closer to an actual infrastructure emergency, with real fire and EMS response involved twice in the same month, rather than just a construction sign and a scripted apology posted quietly to a website nobody reads until after they've already checked in and unpacked. What connects all 6 is that Disney's luxury tier is old enough now that even routine maintenance is starting to fail in visible, guest-facing ways, at the exact moment prices at these specific resorts have climbed to their highest levels in the brand's entire history, with no sign of that trend reversing anytime soon. Paying luxury rates and expecting luxury execution in return isn't guests being unreasonable or entitled about what's supposed to be a relaxing theme park vacation. It's the literal premise these 6 resorts have been selling for decades, the entire reason anyone pays the difference over a moderate or value resort in the first place, instead of pocketing the savings and putting it towards something else. If you've stayed at one of these 6 recently, tell us whether the price actually matched what you experienced or whether you walked into something closer to what's on this list instead. And if you want to see the 8 resorts across the rest of the property dealing with this same pattern right now, that video's linked right below this one.